What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Case Digital. My name is Zach, and in today's video, we are answering the question of what is an identifier in Python? Well, what the heck is that? Well, I'm going to give you the answers, and so, without further ado, let's hop right in and start programming. So, plain and simple, identifier are essentially the names that we give to something such as a variable, your packages that you may create in the future, or functions, all that stuff. So, let's talk about some examples, right? So, I could have x is equal to 5, b is equal to 3 plus x. I could have a function. Def is my cool, and it just prints hello, right? So a identifier is essentially this, right? I'm identifying this function and I give it this name. So that's my identifier for this function. And when I call that in Python, what it's going to do, like I could come down here and I could say my cool function, right? So if I run this, so I get something like Python, what is an identifier? I run that and I get just hello prints out because that's the only thing that we're printing out. But the Python backend or the code or how it all works, the programming language, what it does is it identifies that in this script that we just wrote, it says that, my cool function is the name that when called needs to run this set of instructions, right? Or X, when it's used in another spot, it represents using an assignment statement that we talked about in a previous video. It essentially states that this value is, at this time, it's currently 5, right? Because we didn't change it in between where it was used. And so essentially the identifiers are the names. Now, there's things and caveats that come with having an identifier. All right, so the things that you need to watch out are the caveats like I mentioned with these identifiers or with the names that you give an object or a function or a class or a variable is the fact that they have some specific rules. Like for example, if I do an underscore in front and I run this, there's no error. That is perfectly valid. But if I do a 3 in front and I try and run this, you get something like, hey, this is invalid syntax. Like you'll get these errors. So if you don't name or your identifiers correctly, then you'll get errors. For example, identifiers cannot start with a number. Now I've talked about a previous video when I talked about just variables and I show like, can variables have numbers in them? Can whatever? Yeah, it all applies to this underlying, or I guess the overarching thing of like identifiers in general, the names that we give these things, they can all have numbers and all that stuff in them, but they have to be, for example, numbers can't be at the beginning because the Python syntax or what it thinks on the very back end of the code is thinking that like when it sees a number that's starting off with a number, it's going to assume that that's probably a number and going to try and do something with it. Then when it realizes it's attached to some letters, it's like, well, what the heck are these? Like what is 3M? I don't know. And so it throws these kind of invalid syntax errors, right? And so, especially when it's trying to use that and plus an assignment statement, it's just like, yeah, that's broken. I don't know what this person's doing. And so that's why, you can use underscores and stuff like that, but, using dashes, again, that's another thing that you cannot use in your thing. So you can use numbers, you can use underscores, you can use letters. You can't use something like an exclamation point or a tilde or, all these other different symbols. Like those are not valid identifiers for naming a function or function or a variable and stuff like that. So to kind of bring it all back home, an identifier is basically the name that we give things like our variables, our functions, our classes, and above, so that in the back end that Python can use that for later on, so that we don't have to write everything out, or you don't have to write that same statement of code every time you want to run that function, right? It's basically there to help Python be like, yep, this is the name that they're using. Okay, that chunk of code goes here. Let's run it. Boom. Oh, this variable, that this set of stuff is represented to this variable or this name. So we're going to do that every time we see that name. So that's why we can get away with like assigning a value of 5 to X and then being able to use X in multiple spots. And then you'll see like if I were to print out B, then you'll get 8, right? So that's essentially what an identifier is. If you have any questions or additional comments or any thoughts, leave them in the comments below. And until next time, keep on programming.